Incentives Program Manager here with the Department of Commerce. I'll be doing a bulk of the presentation today. We also have some of our colleagues from the Department of Revenue, Ariel Murphy and Jessica Clark, who will also be providing us some fantastic information just as far as how the early adopter incentive program will function and how it will work moving forward. Let me get okay. So we are here. Department of Commerce is hosting this web. Here at Commerce, we strengthen communities. We have a broad array of programs from housing and homelessness to energy to crime victims and public safety. We're really working with lots of businesses, civic leaders, tribes throughout the state of Washington, doing what we can to support communities and residents. Quick snapshot of the building's performance staff. This is the crew that's kind of been charged with implementing this Clean Buildings Performance Standard. Emily is our managing director. Then we have our incentive program team, our data team, our technical assistance team, as well as our program team. So if you do interact with the standard, you interact with Commerce, it's most likely going to be with one of us. Our agenda for today, we will do a brief overview of the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. I know a lot of folks are familiar with the standard, but I feel it's always beneficial to present, give that overview of the standard, why we're here for those folks who may not be aware. Wanted to dive a little bit into the Tier 2 Early Adopter Incentive Program, just give a brief overview of what that is, where we currently are, and what rollout is going to look like for that program. Then we'll talk a little bit more about the specific utility role. We'll go into the Clean Buildings portal, briefly touch on that, which is where a lot of this interaction for utilities will take place. Then our colleagues at the Department of Revenue will speak on their piece, go into a little bit more detail on that public utility tax credit and then the process for claiming that credit with Department of Revenue. And then we should have plenty of time on the back end for questions and comments. Again, if anybody has any comments in the moment, I would refer you to the question and Q&A section, and our team can respond to those questions as they come up. So moving into the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, this was based on ASHRAE Standard 100. ASHRAE is an international society of heating, refrigerating, and air conditioning professionals that have been researching, writing, and recommending standards about the built environment for over 100 years. So Commerce developed amendments to their Standard 100 to conform with the Clean Buildings legislation. And that law was passed back in 2019 with House Bill 1257. The Clean Buildings Performance Standard identifies two tiers of buildings. There are Tier 1 buildings, which are over 50,000 square feet, excluding parking. And then there are Tier 2 buildings, which are buildings between 20,000 and 50,000 square feet, and then multifamily buildings over 20,000 square feet. In the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, Commerce was charged with rulemaking, notifying building owners, administering incentives, supporting mandatory compliance, which is one of the reasons we are here, to help support mandatory compliance. And then also we've been charged with levying fines for those buildings and building owners who are non-compliant. Basic requirements for Tier 2 buildings to comply with the standard. The first one is benchmarking. Then we have an energy management plan and an operations and maintenance program. This requires 12 months of data to create the energy target for a building. But one of the differences between tier 1 and tier 2 buildings, other than the size, is that tier 2 buildings do not have to meet a performance metric at this time. So we're just looking at benchmarking, energy management plan, and operations and maintenance programs. For benchmarking, I'm sure many in the audience are very familiar. This establishes the energy use for a building and defines how much energy the building is using. Buildings will need to create an account with Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and then they will connect that their Energy Star Portfolio Manager account with the Clean Buildings, Washington Clean Buildings portal. The utility providers have a role in benchmarking as they are required to provide energy consumption data to building owners upon request. Large utilities greater than 25,000 customers are required to provide this data using Energy Star Portfolio Manager's automated upload protocol. Smaller utilities are to provide that data to building owners in an Excel document meeting the Energy Star Portfolio Manager specifications. Once a building owner has established their weather normalized energy use intensity for each building in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, from that point, they will need to identify the energy use intensity target for that building as well, and then kind of compare the two. If your weather normalized energy use intensity is above or below that target for similarly sized buildings of similar use. But again, tier 2 buildings are not required to meet a target at this time. The additional portions of the standard for tier 2 buildings are the energy management plan and the operations and maintenance program. So referring to our slide here, the energy management plan is a living document that describes a building's energy performance and typically consists of the building energy metering and reporting, the energy use intensity reporting, any energy efficiency measure implementation, operations and maintenance considerations for energy managers, as well as communications responsibilities. The operations and maintenance program, as I understand, is a little bit more specific. It is also a living document that is used to ensure energy efficient operations and minimize failure of building systems and components throughout their service lives. This is documented in the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, Section 6, Normative Annex L. It is also a component of an energy management plan and lists the inspections and maintenance requirements for specific systems and equipment and establishes responsibilities for individuals operating and maintaining the components and its systems. As far as responsible parties for tier 2 buildings, we have our building owner, and that's the individual or entity possessing title to a building. In the event of a land lease, if you are leasing the land, the building owner would be considered the entity possessing title to the building on the leased land. So we also need to have a qualified energy manager who will sign off on the energy management plan, the operations and maintenance programs, that documentation which is submitted to demonstrate compliance with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. The qualified energy manager is an individual designated by the building owner who has 2 years of experience. That could include educational or professional experience with commercial building operations or building energy management, in addition to the successful completion of the Clean Buildings Tier 2 training program, which is specified by the authority having jurisdiction, which is Commerce, or they can meet the definition of a qualified person. And that is a more rigorous standard as far as background and education. The qualified energy manager, we wanted to make that a little bit more accessible for tier 2 building owners. So if you have that experience, the 2 years of experience, or the education, and you have gone through the tier 2 training program, then that would qualify one as an energy manager. So, a building owner, if they have that experience, if they have that education, that background, and they go through the tier 2 training program, they could be the qualified energy manager. In a lot of there are a lot of churches, a lot of nonprofits, which are tier 2 size. They could designate a volunteer, as long as they have that background, that education, and they go through the tier 2 training program. They should be able to meet that qualified energy manager classification. So trying to make that a little bit easier. We are currently developing that tier 2 training program, and so we are hoping to have more concrete news very soon regarding the program. Looking at building notification, kind of our timelines, we are currently in these first two squares, boxes. We are currently identifying tier 2 buildings and getting them entered into the Clean Buildings portal. The portal at this point has really been structured for tier 1, so we're trying to identify ways which we can now include the tier 2 cohort, which is going to be added in, and then how the compliance is a little bit different between tier 1 and tier 2, so how we can make the portal function best for both. Once we are comfortable with the kind of the stock of buildings which we've been able to identify, we will send notifications out to tier 2 building owners. The legislation requires that happens before July 1st of 2025. So that is, at this point, that's the best date that we can give as far as when those notifications will be sent out, would be before July 1st of 2025. And then from that point, the tier 2 incentive program is open, and a tier 2 building owner could submit their compliance documentation as soon as July 1st of 2025. I forgot to put a box on here, but just for information, compliance with the standard for tier 2 buildings is June 30th of 2027. So that is the last date that folks have to be able to submit their compliance documentation. Moving on to the early adopter incentive program. This is where we are today. The incentive program incentivizes the completion of tier 2 reporting requirements. As stated, those incentive applications will be accepted as soon as July 1st, 2025. That is the official launch date. Then they will be accepted through June 1st of 2030. The incentive funds have been capped at $150 million to be paid out by participating utilities to building owners. That base incentive rate was established at 30 cents per gross square foot, and then Commerce has been allowed to establish an enhanced incentive rate. So we're currently in the process of trying to define what that may look like. As far as the enhanced incentive funding distribution, trying to identify how we can best support vulnerable populations, rural overburdened communities, tribal sovereign nations, and then also look at the impact on multifamily affordable housing, and then try and see if we can support a commitment to anti-displacement for multifamily buildings and for small business owners. And then also trying to kind of establish if we may be able to support high energy users and what that may look like in the future. We're still in the process of identifying tier 2 buildings, but wanted to just kind of do a little rough order of magnitude for folks, to just based on the total program amount that we have, using the base incentive numbers. If we just go with that smallest tier 2 building size of 20,000 square feet, that would mean we have enough funding for 25,000 buildings, which is 25,000 applications. It's 25,000 processes to go through. So it's a lot of applications. Even when we go to that larger tier 2 building size, towards get to the higher end of 50,000 square feet, we're still looking at, having the fiscal capacity for 10,000 separate applications, separate approval processes. So this is a big process that we're looking at right now. And these are kind of the things that we've been mulling over. As far as eligibility for the Tier 2 incentive program, most obviously it has to be a Tier 2 covered building. That is, again, between 20 and 50,000 square feet of gross floor area. All that includes multifamily residential buildings greater than 20,000 square feet of gross floor area, excluding the parking garage. The building must demonstrate compliance with the benchmarking, energy management, and operations and maintenance program requirements of the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. And they must be served by at least one participating utility. And that point kind of springboards us into the rest of this webinar, talking about the utilities role and how we are working together to administer these funds. So the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, the Early Adopter Incentive Program, Commerce will do a lot of the work on the back end, as far as the back and forth with the building owner, the back and forth with ensuring compliance. We will calculate the incentive for each participating utility. That will happen in the portal. And again, that incentive is the base payment of 30 cents per square foot of gross floor area, excluding parking unconditioned or semi-conditioned spaces. We will include that calculation for the enhancement incentive, for the enhanced incentive payment. So that is still in the works, but it will be, processed similarly. And then also worth noting, if more than one fuel type is used by the building, the incentive calculation and the payments are based on the proportion of energy used by fuel type. So if a building has one electricity provider and one natural gas provider, that incentive would be separated out between the two of them. I think I did not get on here as well. Specifically for Tier 2, if a building owner has one participating utility and one non-participating utility that provides energy to the building, the participating utility has been allowed to provide that full incentive payment to cover what the non-participating utility would naturally cover. Wanted to highlight some of the RCWs in regards to the utilities. RCW 1927A-170, that covers benchmarking and data. RCW 1927A-240 covers the incentive payment administration. And then RCW 8216-185 covers the incentive program credit. So mentioned qualifying utility that is an electric, gas company or thermal company allowed a public utility tax credit. That can be consumer-owned or investor-owned gas or utility, and serves more than 25,000 customers. RCW 1927A 240 states that each qualifying utility must administer incentive payments for the State Energy Performance Standard Early Adopter Incentive Program established in RCW 1927A 220 behalf of its customers who are eligible building owners of covered commercial buildings, multifamily residential buildings, or other Tier 2 covered buildings consistent with the requirements of this section. So we have our qualifying utilities who are required to participate in the program, but we also have the ability for any utility who pays public utility tax credit can also participate in the early adopter incentive program. So those would be utilities serving less than 25,000 customers. They can voluntarily opt in to participate into the program. As far as opting in, a utility company that does not meet the requirements of a qualifying utility can opt in to participate. It's very simple. You can send us an email to Clean Buildings Incentive Program, commerce.wa.gov, and we will get you set up in the portal once we have the once the primary contact information has been provided. The utility will then simply be added to the participating utility list within the Clean Buildings portal. They will be granted access, and then we will work with utilities from that point to guide them through the process of how to provide the support to building owners. Moving into the Clean Buildings portal, this is where the building owners will upload their compliance documentation. This is where Commerce staff will review and either approve or have that back and forth with building owners, trying to make any necessary clarifications. This is also where utilities will go in and approve the incentive payments to the building owners. The notification of approved incentive amounts and dates are generated in the portal and sent to the identified utility contact. That's an automatic process in the portal itself, which gets sent to the utility approval. The incentive amounts can be lowered based on the level of the available tax credit. The Tier 1 incentive calculation is a bit more complicated, but the Tier 2 incentive calculation, it will be a bit more simple. It's going to be based on square footage, and then it's going to be either the base incentive amount or the enhanced incentive amount. So that calculation is going to be a bit easier to make, and the utilities can either approve that amount or they can enter in the smaller amount, a smaller amount if tax credits, if the tax credits are not fully available for that amount that has been approved by Commerce. Again, this is in the portal for the Department of Commerce, kind of approving the payment to the building owner. RCW 1927A 240 states nothing in the subsection requires a qualifying utility to administer incentive payments for the State Energy Performance Standard Early Adoption Incentive Program, for which the qualifying utility is not allowed a credit against taxes due under this chapter. We're still a little, in the dark as far as how much public utility tax credit a given utility may have. So if a utility doesn't have enough of the credit available, they can enter in a lower amount. Just took a screenshot from the portal. Again, we're still building out the Tier 2 section of the portal, so this is a screenshot of our testing section in the portal, which will provide kind of a snapshot of what it will look like for utility approvers going in. So we've got our basic building information here up on top. We've got then at the blue bar, the information moving from left to right. This kind of provides the savings. It's going to give that information, that data, and then it will calculate the estimated enhancement amount for Tier 2 buildings. It will provide what Commerce has approved, and then these last 3 sections here are for the utilities to go in and approve. And it is, Commerce has essentially done the work of ensuring compliance, of ensuring an accurate calculation. So utilities come in, you can select approved, or you can select tax credits unavailable. And then in the utility approved amount, that's where a utility would enter in a lower amount if the full amount is not available. So that kind of takes us through the Department of Commerce and into the portal where you would approve your payments. But there's another portion of this which is handled by the Department of Revenue. So they have joined us today, and I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to pass that over to Ariel Murphy for their portion of the presentation. Thank you, Ariel.
Derek.
And thank you, Derek.
Oh,
sorry.
sorry.
Do you mind
Yes,
if I
Jeff?
interrupt real quick before we move to Ariel? Just a reminder to folks in the group here, we do have our Q&A open. We're asking for any questions to come through the Q&A, whether it be for in regards to the building performance standards and incentives, or for the upcoming presentation from Department of Revenue. It's just much easier for us to answer those questions live from our staff. We've got a lot of folks behind the scenes ready to answer those for you, and then we will have a live Q&A before our time is done here. So just a reminder to please add those questions to the Q&A for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you, Ariel. I'll pass it over.
All right, thank you. Just give me a moment to start sharing my screen. All right, so I'm Ariel Murphy. I'm a senior excise tax examiner with the Department of Revenue. I'll be explaining the process for the public utility tax energy efficiency incentive credit that's administered from the Department of Revenue. So the credit requirements. Light and power businesses and gas distribution businesses can earn a credit for participating in this program. Light and power business means the business of operating a plant or system for the generation, production, or distribution of electrical energy for hire or sell, and/or for the wheeling electricity for others. Gas distribution business means the business of operating a plant or system for the production or distribution or hire or sale of gas, whether manufactured or natural. RCW 82-16-010, Section 2 and 4 defines these businesses. The credit is earned after the incentive payments approved by Department of Commerce are made. The credits are equal to 100% of the incentive payments made, plus up to 8% of the documented administrative costs incurred. The credit will be calculated when filing the combined excise tax return for the period following in which the incentive payments are made. The credit is calculated using a credit worksheet, which we will go over in this presentation. The credit may only be used to offset public utility taxes owed. RCW 82-16-185 establishes the credit. Refunds will not be granted in the place of a credit, and this program expires June 30th, 2032. So the process for claiming credits. Department of Commerce will notify utility companies that a building within their jurisdiction qualifies for the incentive payment and will provide the total amount due to the building owner. Then, Department of Commerce will notify Department of Revenue about the approvals of the incentive payments. The utility companies will remit the payment to the building owner and then will fill out the credit worksheet on their combined excise tax return in the period in which the incentive payments were made to claim the credit. The credit can be applied to public utility taxes due on that return. Any unused credits can be used through that calendar year or any time during the following 2 calendar years. So this is the Energy Efficiency Incentive Credit Worksheet on the combined excise tax return that must be completed to generate the credit. Only fields 1, 2, and 8 must be filled out. The other fields will automatically calculate. For this example, we entered in an incentive payment amount of $50,000 and administrative costs of $5,000. Because the administrative costs are limited to 8% of the incentive payment, the allowed administrative costs are calculated at $4,000. This field will automatically calculate. The total credit allowed based on this information is $54,000. Based on the PUT taxes or public utility taxes calculated on the return, only $10,000 can be claimed on this return, and this leaves a credit balance of $44,000. This credit will be available to claim on all returns for the calendar year the incentive payments were made and for the following 2 calendar years. On the next return, the worksheet will populate with the remaining available credit balance. In this example, the $44,000 credit balance that was calculated in the prior returns worksheet in field 9 has been carried forward and displays in field 5 of this worksheet. The credit taken for this returns PUT taxes is $15,000, and field 9 calculates the remaining credit balance to be $29,000. That will be carried forward to the next return. In this first image, we have completed the worksheet for the first credit being taken. After completing the worksheet, the return will populate with the total credit available and the amount being taken on the return. In the second image, this showcases what the next return will display for the remaining credit balance and before the worksheet has been completed. So adding additional incentive payments. This image shows how the worksheet will look when a new incentive payment has been made. Fields 1 and 2 contains the new incentive payment of $25,000 and administrative costs of $10,000. Field 3 calculates the allowable administrative cost of $2,000, and Field 4 provides the total credit of $27,000. Field 5 shows the remaining credit balance from the prior incentive payment, so $44,000, with Field 7 showing the combined credit balance from Fields 4 and 5 for a total credit balance of $71,000. So when completing the worksheet, Field 8 will only allow credit to be taken up to the total credit available. If an amount is entered that exceeds the total credit available, the system will show an error on that field and displays a text box that the figure cannot be greater than the amount available. If the worksheet is completed without correcting the error, the return will also show an error in the credits panel and will prevent the user from going to the next page till the error has been corrected. For credit verification, Department of Commerce will provide information on the approved incentives to Department of Revenue. Then Department of Revenue will compare the approved incentive amounts with the credits claimed on the excise tax returns. If there is any discrepancy between the incentives approved by Department of Commerce and the incentives reported on the returns, Department of Revenue will contact the business claiming the credit for additional information. Also, if a qualified building is served by multiple utility companies, the credit will be apportioned to each utility based off of Department of Commerce's calculation. So additional provisions and information. The credit earned in one calendar year can be claimed against taxes due during the same calendar year and for the following 2 calendar years. The credit cannot be carried backwards. If a claimed credit is higher than the Department of Commerce approved incentives, the credits must be repaid, including interest. Department of Revenue will issue a balance due notice for the adjustments. If penalties and additional interest may apply if the credit is not paid by the due date. However, if the utility company is instructed to pay out an amount that is later determined to be abnormal or inaccurate due to no fault of the utility company and claims a credit for that amount, they will not have to pay it back. No annual tax performance report is due for this credit program, and the amount of credit taken and the identity of a business that takes the credit is not confidential taxpayer information and is subject to disclosure. With that, are there any questions or comments?
Not seeing anything in the Q&A related to our presentation. Everything else seems to be related to the prior presentation. So I think, Derek, if you'd like to go ahead and take presentation back, if any questions come up, then it can be a part of our normal Q&A.
Great. Sounds good. Yeah, and I would also encourage folks at this time, I think we've gotten through a bulk of the information. Yeah, if you have questions, Michael, please feel free to come off and ask your question.
So that worksheet that you just presented, that's filled out by the energy provider, not the building owners, correct?
Were you talking to revenue there?
Revenue,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's filled out by the utility companies in order to claim the credit related to the incentive payments made to the building owner.
Thank you.
Sure thing.
If anyone else has any questions, I'd encourage them to come off of mute, or if anyone has any questions from the Q&A or in the chat, we can address those.
I had a question for Commerce, please.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just unclear following the revenue presentation. Let's say in an example, the utility does not have enough tax credits available to match a credit or to meet incentive at the time. So we in the Commerce in the portal would say not enough credits available, and we would enter a reduced amount, and yet we still have a balance carrying forward that we are allowed to claim moving forward. So I'm unclear the purpose of indicating to Commerce if there are not enough credits available and how that impacts the customer in the end.
Yeah, I mean, to my understanding, I think it's as far as when the credits are not available, that tells us that there's zero funding, from this utility to provide any incentive payments within the commerce system. And then, we would have to follow up with the building owner at that point as far as there not being enough to support that incentive payment. Does that help answer?
So it's not going to impact the customer. You'll determine the outcome with the customer.
Well, I mean, it would impact the customer in that they wouldn't have access to those incentive funds.
Okay.
You know, but we would work with the customer, you know, on the back end to let them know what was happening and what was going on, that those funds weren't available.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't see if Michael or Beth had their hand up first. So we'll go with Beth.
Okay, I'll pop on. Maybe you covered this, but can you go over what costs can be included in when applying for the tier 2 early adopter incentives? Like, is it audit costs, cost to help put together, EMP, O&M? So yeah, maybe that's one question. And then it looked like by the process that customers just kind of go forth and do that and then come to Commerce, but do they kind of need to reserve the funding first and then go forward with their plan?
Well, the incentive payment itself it's after the fact, you know, so compliance has been met, all the documentation has been submitted and verified. And so, you know, then that qualifies them to receive the incentive. There was nothing in the legislation that said the incentive funds needed to be spent on X, you know, or they needed to be spent on Y. So there's no limitation as to what the building owner can do with the funds once they receive them. You know, it's kind of an assumption, you know, that they will have incurred costs in order to comply with the standard. So this is, you know, then a little bit of help, you know, on the back end. But it is something that happens after the fact, after compliance has been met. And then what was the second part of your question?
Yeah, let's see. So yeah, what costs can be included? So you talked about that, but yeah, just like with tier 1, it's kind of like they reserve the funds first, like they come to Commerce and say,
Right.
hey, we're going to do that. So with tier 2, do they do that same thing, like reserve it and say, I'm going to go do these things, or they just come after the
They will
fact?
come. Yeah, it's a little bit more first come, first served, you know, with the tier
Okay.
1 program, as a lot of folks know, you know, there's the performance metric. The tier 1 building has to be 15 over its energy use target. So, you know, in order to get into that program, we have to reserve those funds, set those funds aside, make sure they're available. So then once they get through their compliance process, they've shown that they've come under their target, then those funds are released to the tier 1 building owners. But yeah, for tier 2, it's a little bit more straightforward. They can submit their compliance documentation. They don't have to meet a performance metric. So those funds, you know, should be available, assuming they're there, assuming the utility has them to provide, then they would be available to the building owners. Michael?
Thanks.
Yeah, just following up on Michelle's question earlier. So when this is first come, first serve for both tier 1 and tier 2, once that reserves are filled out, if somebody's applied, then Commerce will notify the building that they may have qualified, but you don't have the reserve funding to give them.
Yeah. Once we get to that point, you know, once the programs are spent out, you know, I'm sure we haven't, we're still kind of trying to develop the programs and get them launched, and get the word out. So I think we'll develop a process, you know, once we get to that point, of these programs kind of coming to an end, of what that's going to look like, what that communication is going to look like with building owners. Yes, Jeff?
Thanks, Derek. Just wanted to jump in real quick. I saw a couple questions in the chat. I'm hoping I'm capturing them all, but I'm wondering if I can ask those to you and the team real quick so we can answer those.
Great, yeah.
So one is asking if the incentive is reoccurring or a one-time incentive.
The incentive would be a one-time thing. At this point, you know, it's for one compliance cycle. you know, I mean, it's anticipated there will be other compliance cycles in the future, but this incentive payment that we're talking about now is for this compliance cycle. There's no there's no way to say if there will be other incentive programs for or additional incentive programs for additional compliance cycles. But this specific funding is this is for this compliance cycle, this 5-year compliance cycle.
Excellent. Thanks, Derek. And got one more in regards to the incentive, asking if this incentive can be obtained in addition to the public entity audit incentive.
Yeah, we still have to kind of define that a little bit more, but there's nothing right now that limits building owners from applying to both. It's just it's going to be something that we'll need to noodle on a little bit more to have a definitive answer. You know, at this point, the audit incentive program came on a little bit after. There may be other grant programs that come after which support clean buildings compliance. So really trying to find out how to balance those opportunities for building owners and ensure they can get the support that they need, but that they're not necessarily getting supported more than any other building owner. I don't know if anybody else has anything they would want to add to that from the team. Wanted to go in a little bit more, and if anybody has any questions, please do feel free to raise your hand. Just want to move on to a couple other portions. Just talk about the incentive program planning, where we're at right now. We are looking to determine prioritization of the incentive funding, of the enhanced incentive funding. We're currently finalizing a rough draft of the guidebook, which we are hoping to post for public comment here within the next couple of weeks. We are developing resources, including the templates for compliance, the Qualified Energy Manager training, and then we're just hoping that folks can, you know, continue to communicate about the program and about, you know, just available support. Just continue to do that networking. Upcoming events. We have been hosting the Clean Buildings office hours. Jeff has been hosting those one Tuesday a month. They're very informative. We have lots of the team there to answer any questions, you know, really from any perspective about the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. Really happy to see those office hours. I think that's a really great way to connect with Commerce and really, you know, just to answer, get any questions answered that you may have, or if there's anything you feel that we should be, you know, considering or thinking about a little bit more. That's a great space to include that. We have another webinar coming up on December 12th. That will be we'll talk about finalizing the program. That will open a 30-day public comment period for any additional measures that folks feel should be included before we do finalize the guidebook and finalize the Tier 2 incentive program before implementation for July 1st of 2025. I like our engaged in commerce employee over there. And then wanted to just talk about available support that's here for folks. If you wouldn't mind posting some of those links in the chat. For Department of Commerce, you know, if you have questions about the Clean Buildings Performance Standard in general, kind of some more overarching questions, you can reach out to us at buildings@commerce.wa.gov. If you have more specific questions about the incentive program, You can reach out to us there, Clean Buildings Incentive Program at commerce.wa.gov. It's a nice long one. I'll see if we can get a longer one. I don't know if that will be possible. And then we've also have a utility specific contact form. If folks are interested in becoming a participating utility, or if they, just want to reach out and make a connection, we have a utility specific contact form that is available as well. For the Department of Revenue, the tax incentive programs, we have a link which we'll provide there, and then their account administration contact number 360-705-6218. I would also be remiss not to mention the Building Potential hosts a Clean Building Performance Standard Utility Work Group. Rebecca Shepard is leading the way right now with that. She said it was fine to include her email there if folks wanted to reach out with questions about the utility work group, how to participate. She also shared, if you just have questions in general, are looking for support in your role, she encouraged folks to reach out to her as well. Yeah. And with that, I think we've gotten through to the last slide. If anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hand, pop off of mute. Otherwise, we can give you back a few minutes of your day.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Dolores. Thank you.
I put it in the Q&A, but anyway, how does the tax credit play out with nonprofit businesses such as a church? We have a church and school business, and we don't have property tax or that sort of thing. So how does that work?
Well, the tax would be it's paid by the tax portion comes on behalf of the utility. So the building's use, whether it's a nonprofit or a church, that isn't necessarily relevant to the tax, to the public utility tax. That's
right.
just.
Does it lessen or somehow impact the incentive amount?
No.
Really? No. Okay.
No, not at all.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Sorry. Thanks for the clarification. Yes, Jeff.
Thanks, Derek. Yeah, we do have a few questions in the Q&A that I know our team is working on a lot of the questions, but I'm wondering if I can ask a few that we haven't gotten answers to yet.
Great, yeah.
First one is asking if there is any considerations for associations as they're expecting unfair hardship to have determine their common spaces. Goes on, say consultants are having to review building plans at each floor to confirm the common space to comply with this, thus adding more fees to the process.
I don't know that I have a specific answer to that one. I don't know if anyone on the team may have a better informed response.
And if we need to dive into any more of these questions offline, the plan is to be able to take this Q&A and send out, correct, Eric?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So
thanks for that reminder.
So just to clarify, this is Anna Lindbergen with the Clean Buildings team as well. Michael, just to clarify, you're asking if we would consider someone's financial hardship because the consultants are calculating certain spaces. The calculations for the incentive, regardless of what's additional cost is incurred, is based on the square footage. Does that answer, kind of clarify kind of our limitations with it? And the only thing we're authorized to do is enhance the payments, and that hasn't really been determined.
Yeah, and that's kind of the question is, when I'm getting some pushback on some of the smaller communities that don't have enough funding in their reserves to pay for this early adopter incentive program, or even just, you know, fulfilling the basic need by 2027, is that, you know, some of the buildings don't have building plans. They don't know exactly where their common spaces are, et cetera. So,
I understand. So there's many questions regarding is this organization considered for the enhanced payment? And to my understanding, we haven't determined that yet, but we are still accepting comments and so that we can consider certain organizations that we haven't even thought of. Correct, Derek?
Yeah, I think at this point we've focused a little bit more on location. You know, if the building is in a rural location, or if it's a vulnerable population or overburdened community. Office of Financial Management has a map that we're looking at, which would be easy for folks to determine if they fall within those boundaries. Then also looking at multifamily affordable homes, affordable housing, and then building owners who are willing to commit to anti-displacement for multifamily or small business, and then trying to establish if we would be able to establish an enhancement based on, you know, a high energy use and what that may look like. Those are kind of
Yes.
the four categories we're looking at this point.
But if you're willing to take some feedback, if
Yes, definitely.
yes, if you could email that Clean Buildings Incentive Program at commerce.wa.gov and just let us know, hey, please consider schools, or please consider this, XYZ, something that, we can't always think of all the different instances that, but if you are an advocate for that organization or those building types, please send in those comments and we will certainly consider it. As far as Michael, as far as your question is concerned, if a building is experiencing financial hardship in just attempting to comply, we do have the financial hardship exemption. Same for tier, as it is for tier 1, it does apply to tier 2 as well.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Arlen.
And to add to that, Michael, there are other program or grant programs in the future that may be able to support and offset some of the costs. Just tune in to our bulletin and you'll hear more. There's tons of funding available. And especially for multifamily who are HUD assistants, there's free benchmarking services for them.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Arlen.
Thanks, Lynn, for chiming in, and Derek for that. I've got a couple more. Are we okay going a little bit past noon?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine, doing that. Folks obviously can hop off if they'd like to, but yeah, we can get through these questions quickly.
Excellent, thank you. So we're also being asked for clarification if the incentive payments are going to be credits to the buildings from the providers, or will there be an actual check payment?
That is, I don't know that I have the specific answer as far as how the utilities will be administering their payments. I don't know if anybody has a more informed response, but it would be a payment coming from the utility, whether that's a check. But I don't know that has been determined or written out as far as how the utility makes that payment to the building owner. I don't know if anybody else has any better information.
That's my understanding. So that is good.
What was that? You were scratchy.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Josette.
All right. And looks like we've got one more asking who funds the early adopter incentive programs? Will the dollars be used to be subtracted from other utility incentive programs that are funded by costs applied to bills, or are these kept completely separate?
I mean, they're separate as far as I understand. Josette or someone, I don't know if you have a better response.
Yeah, so the early adopter incentive programs for tier 1 and tier 2 are funded by tax credits taken by utilities against their public utility taxes they have to pay. So that's how it's funded. These costs, if the question, I guess you could maybe clarify your question, but the costs aren't applied to the bills and they are separate. Is there a follow-up question or a different perspective on that one?
Hey, this is Leah. Yeah, I was just wondering because I know like through PSE, we have incentive programs based on money that we contribute to a fund on our bill every month. And I just want to make sure, is this a separate fund that this is coming from, or are we going to get incentives? And then that's also going to pull out of the other incentive programs that we have throughout utilities.
Hey, Leah, this is Chris from PSE. The short answer is they are separate funds. So the rider that pays for all the incentive programs is completely separate from the funds for compliance with CPBS.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks, everyone. And Derek, it looks like that is all the open questions we have at the moment.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for sticking around and for attending. Again, we'll send out copies of the slide, links to the recording, responses to Q&A just as soon as we can. If you need to reach out to us, please do so. We've got my email, the building's email, and the incentives program email as well. And then the link to the Commerce website for more information. But we are always open for conversation, for feedback. Please do reach out to us if you have any questions or if you have anything you'd like to add. Thanks everyone so much and have a great rest of your day.